Hello and welcome to the next installment of the Andy Warhol Diary in the old Razzle Dazzle. This is your pal Mubbo. Today we're going to be looking at Monday, December 13th, 1976. However, before we get into it, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. As always, my PFA, a plea for assistance, finding the person or persons responsible for the murder of my uncle, Charles Pancheri, in his home on October 4th, 2011. He was found with multiple stab wounds on the kitchen floor. They think he was murdered overnight and just left for dead. So if you have any information, if you were in Elizabeth, New Jersey around 2011, and you have anything, any tip at all, as it is currently a cold case, but the detective assured me that if someone were to come forward with new information, they would absolutely take another look at it. So I'm asking, please, if you have any tips, please submit them to the tip hotline at 908-654-TIPS. That's 908-654-8477. Or you can go on their website to www.uctip.org. That's www.unioncountytip.org. Thank you very much for any information. Everything is appreciated. One more thing before we get started. This is the website for the digital version of the Andy Warhol Diary. It has the complete text. You just go here to this link, and then on the homepage, you just click right here for full text. And it'll bring up everything if you want to read today's entry before watching or after. Today we're looking at Monday, December 13th, 1976. So let's get into it. Designer Halston's Barnacle, a.k.a. the Traveling Mustache, better known as Victor Hugo, picked up Andy on this day to take him to the UN Plaza. Now, many people did not like that Andy Warhol was hanging out with Victor. It was a not very well-kept secret that Victor was not well-liked. But for some reason, Andy and him just clicked. And much to the disappointment and annoyance to Andy's then partner, Jed Johnson, he was very vocal about not wanting Andy to be hanging around with Victor. He thought it was a very bad influence. And no doubt, Victor hanging around was one of the contributing factors in their split up. Now, the dinner was being held at the UN Plaza for Alyce Kaiser was giving the dinner for designer Halston. So we talked about Alyce and Henry Kaiser in a previous video. Alyce was Henry's first wife's nurse, and then the wife died. And supposedly she gave Henry permission to then marry Alyce. So Henry was in his 60s when he married Alyce, and Alyce was in her 30s. After Henry's death, Alyce went a little insane and got her, her heels on and started kicking up all over town. And she got heavily involved with the art scene and the nightlife in the 1970s. As they were on their way to the party, they realized they forgot to pick up Bianca Jagger. So they headed over to the Pierre Hotel to get her. Now, the Pierre Hotel is a luxury 5-star hotel located on 61st Street. And this is a very famous hotel. It's mentioned in a lot of TV shows and movies. But the thing I know it best for was the Pierre Hotel was where the relatives from the TV show MASH met up in the episode called The Party, and this was in season 7. So the characters started talking about, wouldn't it be great if all the relatives could get together and all meet in New York City and have dinner and go dancing. And you might remember a couple of things. Father Mulcahy's sister played the saxophone. She was a nun, I believe, and she was also on some kind of sports team. She might have played basketball or something. And Charles Winchester's parents invited Radar's family to visit them in Cape Cod, which horrified Charles. And we also find out that Klinger's family knows that he's in Korea, even though he told them that he's stationed at Fort Dix in New Jersey. It's a very good episode, but I remember only seeing it once. Now, I've watched MASH on repeat on the TV, but this, for some reason, I can't seem to catch this one very often. And the other one I only remember seeing once is the one where Margaret is knitting. The episode is called A War for All Seasons, where they go through a typical year in MASH, in the MASH unit. And what everybody is doing, like, throughout the month. Like in this one, in the beginning of the year, Margaret starts knitting a scarf, and then it becomes a sweater, and then it finally becomes a blanket at the end of the year. And this was MASH's 200th episode. Now, as far as characters go, I'm just going to go over this really quick. If you're a MASH fan, you have your no doubt very strong opinions. But for me, I think that Trapper is greater than BJ. There's just something, I liked BJ in the beginning, but then they started turning him into Hawkeye Jr. and giving them all these ridiculous things to do. And I don't think it was very in character with him. And I think they just ran out of things for him to do. I also think that Winchester is 1,000 times greater than Frank Burns. I have a much love for Charles. One funny thing about Charles is that if you're a fan of like the war lore as it applies to MASH, when Charles comes on to the MASH unit, there's only about 9 months left of the Korean War. But when Charles comes on, he's in it for 130 episodes. So it went on much, much longer than a 9 month, because MASH was only on once a week. And it's a lot like how One Piece has been on TV for, 25 years, although in the actual show, they're only, I think it's 2 years, but it might actually be only 3 years have passed in show. Also, some interesting things about the actors is that David Ogden Stiers, who played Charles, didn't have any money for a car when he started MASH, so he had to ride a skateboard to the film lot every day. And you can visibly see when he started making money on the show, as he started gaining a bit of weight, as he was able to eat better. He was actually kind of thin when they first brought him on. And another thing I really like about Charles is that they didn't go with their original plan, that is the writers, to make him another love interest for Margaret. That Larry Linville, who played Frank Burns, really wasn't given that much to do except to, thirst after Margaret. And then when Margaret, got married, this picture is actually Frank Burns saying, "Bye, Margaret." But in Larry's real life, he was actually going through a very emotional divorce. So not only was he losing Margaret on the show, but he was losing his wife in real life around this time. And that had a lot to do with why he left the show. It was just too much for him. Also, you can see a little bit of the original idea for Charles and how they had intended to get him and Margaret together in the very beginning. On the day where Charles comes into the camp, it coincides with the day that Margaret gets back from her lackluster honeymoon. And there's a small scene in I think it's the room where they're like washing up for surgery, or some kind of prep room. And Charles mentions that something is boorish and crass. And then they have some conversation. Margaret is talking to somebody else, and then she says boorish and crass. And Charles and her look at each other for the first time, and then the camera quickly pans to the right, and it goes on to looking at something else, and you can just barely see them like making that first eye contact. So that was supposed to be the moment that they met and locked eyes for the first time. Also, Charles has this hobby. When he's in the MASH unit, he makes tapes to send back home, specifically to his sister, Honoria. And he makes this first tape to her where he talks about this terrible camp that he's in, and it's so drab and terrible, but the one shining light is Margaret. And then all of a sudden, this goes away, very quickly, and Margaret becomes more of a platonic, sisterly character for Charles. And Charles didn't really have a love interest. And I'm not sure if this is why, but Charles was a closeted gay man during this time. At the time, he had a wife and a child, and they never really wrote any kind of serious love interest. He had a couple of flings, like with that French girl, and then that I don't know if she was a prostitute, but some Vietnamese girl or Korean girl who he called her wimpy because she liked hamburgers. And then there was, I believe her name was Donna. She came in on the episode Mr. and Mrs. Who, where Charles was under the impression that they had gotten married and he didn't remember. It's very funny. But there was never a serious love interest for Charles. And apparently a lot of the characters weren't aware that Charles was gay at all. I mean, that David Ogden Stiers was gay, but I have a feeling that he had to have had this conversation with at least one of the writers. And that's why I think they never really wrote anything for him for a serious love affair. And he and Margaret just didn't have chemistry. Like I would watch them together and try to picture him falling all over her, and I couldn't see it. He wasn't that kind of personality, but in return what we got was this fantastic character growth. We got to learn about his overbearing father and how Charles always felt that he never had a dad. He always had the proper father, and how he was expected to marry a certain type of girl. And he gives Margaret a lecture about not dating out of her social class and this kind of thing. And it was a really interesting growth to the stodgy Charles that we started off with, and he was very well liked and by the other cast members by the end. Whereas Frank Burns he went out and still wasn't liked, even though he was sent home. Also, kind of controversial. Maybe if you have diehard feelings about this one way or the other, but I'm going to say that Colonel Blake was better, in my opinion, than Colonel Potter. I like Colonel Potter as a character. However, I felt that the episodes with Colonel Blake were just funnier. Like, they were better written. So I'm not sure if new writers came on around the time of Potter, but a lot of people see Potter as a father figure or a grandfatherly type of figure. And I get that, but the idea of someone who's completely inept trying to run a camp that is also completely chaotic is funnier to me than a straight-laced person coming in to a chaotic environment and trying to make sense of it. That's just my feeling. Now, if you are an avid MASH watcher, you will notice that I accidentally didn't pull Colonel Potter for his Potter picture. I actually pulled General Bradford Hamilton Steele from the episode The General Flipped at Dawn. And it's really funny watching MASH for the first time and like seeing this character come up, and he just has a very short one episode stint, and then he disappears, and then all of a sudden he reappears as Colonel Potter. And that happens a lot in MASH, especially, I was going to try to research this a little bit, but if you watch MASH a lot, you'll notice that the name Lorraine keeps coming up. And actually, Colonel Blake's wife had a completely different name at the start of MASH, but then they just changed her name to Lorraine one day. And all of these like side characters and women, especially I think it's the woman that's that Trapper called about the Adams ribs, or maybe it was BJ, I can't remember, but one of them was named Lorraine. BJ's wife's name is Peg. I was going to say they made her Lorraine too. But you'll notice this name Lorraine popping up in like all of these side characters, but they never gave a regular cast member the name of Lorraine. And it's just one of those weird things. Now, in this episode, as I said, General Bradford, it's an okay episode. It goes a little off the rails, but it gives us the best line of the episode, which is when Klinger strides up to him in his women's clothes, expecting General Steele to react strongly, and his only line was, "Not now, Marjorie. I'm inspecting the troops." So that is my MASH minute. Also, if you're one of those people who have never seen MASH but you like to binge watch, MASH is the perfect show to binge watch. You can get lost in these characters. All right, we're going to go back to the diary because we're not talking about MASH. This isn't MASH, MASH time. Back in the diary. After picking up Bianca, Victor gave her some powder, aka the devil's dandruff, but Bianca didn't want it. And I think there's a specific reason for this, is because Bianca was one of the people who liked to shit talk about Victor Hugo. And I think she felt that if she started taking his drugs, she would then owe him some kind of loyalty or friendship. But she didn't want to appear two-faced, like especially in front of Andy. Andy would have been like, "Oh, you took his drugs, but now you're talking bad about." Like, he would be the first one to do something like that. So I think she kind of like stuck to her feelings that she was not going to be friends with him and he was not going to be welcomed into her circle. So the first person Andy and company saw at this dinner was Martha Graham, who was an American modern dancer responsible for creating the Graham technique. This technique was also known as this technique was a principle known as the contraction and release in modern dance, and she's often referred to as the Picasso of dance. She was the first dancer to perform at the White House, and Martha was invited to dance at the White House in 1938 by the Roosevelt family. In 2011, Google marked what would have been her 117th birthday by dedicating the logo to her. Also at this party was CZ Guest, aka Lucy Douglas. She was an American actress, author, horsewoman, fashion designer, and fashion icon, and you can tell she is filthy rich by those job titles in quotation marks. Lucy's family was from a wealthy family of Boston Brahmins who made up Boston's historic upper class, which Charles Winchester's family would absolutely have been a part of. Some of the Boston families were the Adamses, that's Sam Adams, second cousin of John Adams, who was the second president of the USA, and John Quincy Adams. Also the Brimleys, the Buckinghams, the Cabots, the Coolidges, who was Calvin Coolidge was the 30th president, was part of that family. The Delanos, FDR, the Emersons, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the poet, was in that family. The Forbes family and the Payne family, of which one Michael Payne was unknowingly hiding Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle in the garage of his Texas home. Oswald told Payne they were curtain rods. And also in the Brahmin families would have been the muse and youth Quaker of Andy Warhol, Edie Sedgwick. Andy said that architect Paul Rudolph was also at this party. Paul was an American architect, and he was Yale University's chair of their Department of Architecture for 6 years. He was known for his use of reinforced concrete and highly complex floor plans. In other words, he built brick shithouses. I mean, look at these things. He's best known for designing the Boston Government Service Center and the Yale Art Architecture Building. Paul Rudolph died in 1997 of cancer and complications brought on by mesothelioma, which was linked to asbestos. It was believed at the time he served working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard during World War II was the culprit and cause of the condition. Andy mentioned that Paul did the apartment for Mrs. Kaiser with a white-on-white theme, and Mrs. Kaiser had a bedroom as big as Andy's own 860 space. There was just one bed in this bedroom and a floor-to-ceiling glass window with a view that Andy said terrified him, but he remarked that it was beautiful. This isn't the actual apartment. I pulled one of the apartments that was listed at the UN Plaza. Other people at this event include Marisol and Larry Rivers. Marisol Escobar was a successful sculptor in her own right who found inspiration from Warhol's pop art, but because she was a woman, she felt her art was not taken as seriously as she would have liked. Andy referred to Marisol as the first girl artist with glamour. Now you can see one of her sculptures right here she did of Andy Warhol with a pair of real Andy Warhol shoes. And if you'd like to read this whole article, it's on the Smithsonian website. I'm just going to take a sip of water really quick. There's a link there if you want to read the whole article. Also at this event was Larry Rivers. He was an American artist and considered by many to be the godfather and grandfather of pop art. He lived at the infamous Chelsea Hotel, no doubt running into the Chelsea Girls and other colorful personalities who were associated with Warhol. Also at this gathering were Tiffany designer Elsa Peretti. We talked about her already in another video. And also Warhol muse and model, actress, socialite, Baby Jane Holzer, and her hair. Yacht broker and financial advisor Bob Denison was also there. We talked about him in another video. And if you are interested, you can have Bob Denison's face on your wall for only $200,000. And let me tell you, people, if I had $200,000, there's no way I would buy this. Who wants this? Somebody bought it. One last person that Andy mentions at this gathering was Polly Bergen. And Andy talked to her about the topic of her TV show that morning, which was androgyny. Polly was an American actress, singer, TV host, game show panelist, and entrepreneur, but you might know her as the infamous Fran Felstein on The Sopranos, who sang Happy Birthday. Now, I couldn't find the exact show that Andy was talking about, but this is a list of talk shows that Polly appeared on around 1976. So it was one of these. And that's going to do it for this day in the Warhol Diary. Today in history, really quick, the Golden Gate Bridge District starts ferry service to Larkspur, where you can take in the exciting sights like the San Quentin prison. Also on this day, the longest nonstop passenger flight from Sydney to San Francisco is completed in 13 hours and 44 minutes. So that was 50 years ago in 1976. So just for laughs, I went online and I wanted to see if in 50 years any improvements were made and we could get from Sydney to San Francisco any faster. And the answer is no. It is still 15 to 20 hours. So in 50 years, there has not been made any improvements in speed to get from San Fran to Australia. And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the next one. We'll be looking at December 14th, 1976. MUBBO.